All right, I think I am set on my side. If you guys are ready to go.
Yeah, I just want to tag you really quick and say, here we go.
Oh, that's fine. You can do that while we roll into the new intro. I'm curious to see
I like
what you guys think.
We still dip into the hip, so we're into this.
I'm going to say my wife was not impressed, and then she was actually pissed that when she found out how long it took me to just make this, I was 2 days worth.
Oh, yeah, don't take so long.
Tossing Salad Podcast with your host, Brian.
I like it.
Right? I mean,
the ASMR angle. What is it? Am I dating myself?
ASMR.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes when you do it all yourself and you don't have a budget, you just got to do the best that you can. Am I right?
Yep.
You are a creator, sir. A creator with an O.
I am a creator. And this is the Tossing Salad Podcast. I am Brian Simatros, your host. And we have the Skiptown All-Stars with us this week. Skiptown James and Skiptown Denise.
Yes.
Did I say that in the right order?
Probably not.
It's fine.
Because stop billing.
No.
Well, because one of you is verified, so I figured that person goes first, but the other person has way more followers. How does that work out?
Oh my gosh.
Well, to be fair, I had a business prior to starting the podcast with James, so I do have some followers that came from that business that still continue to follow me and our travel podcast adventures. So that's how that all started.
She's being humble, actually. Look at me and then look at her.
Stop it.
And then figure out which one you would like to follow, male, female, or otherwise.
Stop.
I didn't know if this was like a Skip and Shannon thing to where there might be some animosity come contract time with the podcast.
We actually try and suppress it for our show, but it may roll out. It may bubble over on yours.
I didn't know, so I went with whoever was the verified account first. So
verified, it's true.
I appreciate you
recognizing.
I appreciate you doing Freedom for James a few months back. My children definitely got a kick out of that.
I think that was something that I saw when I first started following you guys, and I don't remember how. I don't know if it was Denise or something on Reddit, and I came across your podcast, and I was like, it's like everything you guys post, I feel like I have something to say about it, which is like the great part. It's just, I don't know if it's because we're kind of in the same stages of life or what.
Yeah.
It could be, but we obviously have a shared interest. I mean, you like NXS. I love NXS.
I did grow up on NXS, and you know the whole records. I'm getting into the whole record craze and stuff.
I listened to that one. That was a great episode.
So we probably do have a lot in common, just outside of our age. I think you know, all three of us.
Yeah, and so, we're happy you reached out to us. I had actually seen some of your posts before and watched them in their entirety, so I knew who you were. And when you reached out to us, I was like, "Oh, look at this! We have a comrade." So.
Well, you have a huge fan, and I'm not just saying that because you guys are like right here right now. I literally, because I can't, when you're a content creator, when you create most of your stuff like you guys do, and I don't know about you guys, but for me it's hard to consume a lot of other stuff. Your guys is, I'm telling you, you guys are on, you're sitting on gold with how you have things set up, which is why you're on here today.
Oh,
thank you very much.
Very, very sweet.
I was going to say it means a lot because we know what it takes to put an episode together. And I feel one of the reasons I personally don't consume nearly as many podcasts as I used to is because I'm so dang busy putting my own together. And I know you can relate to that.
Yeah. Well, let me see if I have the identity of your show, the Skiptown All-Stars. You guys are a power couple. Podcast power couple. You ain't got a home anymore, so you guys are just traveling all over the place.
We are. That part.
Your kids are gone. They don't want anything to do with you.
That is true.
They're living their own lives. Yeah. Which how many kids do you guys have?
3.
Yeah.
And they're all girls?
All girls. Yeah. We have one in Texas. We have who has graduated college. Thank goodness. Yeah, she's the one we had to drag across the finish line.
Yeah.
And then we have two that are still in school. We have one that's attempting to get into law school. She goes to the University of Utah. And then we just moved. If you follow our show, you know we have an athlete in the family, and she just transferred from Seattle all the way to the other coast in Hartford, Connecticut, going to Trinity College. So they keep us busy, even if they're not around.
It's true. Yeah.
And I was going to say it initially, one would think and ask James, being the only guy in that house.
Yeah.
Initially, when you guys had a house.
Yeah.
That it would be really hard and really difficult being the only guy. But I was thinking about this last night. Is it harder on Denise because it's 4 women together in a house?
I think they're definitely tougher on her. I've enjoyed the ability to be the fun guy on weekends. And I was, as much as you can with a little girl, I still treated them like boys to a degree. They were all in sports. We were all at the soccer field for 6 hours every Saturday. I have one that actually watches sports along with me. So, I think it was really important as a, hashtag girl dad to, are you going to do that?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I was white and you were dark shirt. Go ahead.
It's because it's gray. And so, but I think, it was important as a hashtag girl dad I felt like it wasn't just my job to be jokey or funny or just kind of check out when they were doing girly things or whatever. But I felt like it was pretty important for me to sort of help them build their armor for the world that they were going to enter when dad wasn't around,
Right. Right. And you guys have talked about them, even though I think the vehicle for your show is the moving around city to city, doing the like the travel, like we're going to this city. Here are some things to check out. Here are some things to do.
Yeah.
For me, the content is you guys and putting you in different situations to find out what Denise thinks about this, what James thinks about this. And it's not just so much the traveling, but that gives you the opportunity for us to see more of what you guys are like.
Yeah.
We've opened that up, I think, a little bit more. When we first started, we didn't realize how important it was for people to really get to know us. I mean, we thought we're just going to go. Okay. So initially the way we had started out was, which is still the case, we're looking for a new hometown. So the whole thing is, could we live here? And when we started, it was really just about like, oh, we're in Santa Fe or we're in Sedona. Then, I don't know, we got some people who would share with us their feelings about the show. And they said, I really want to get to know you guys more. So for instance, like one of the first times we bantered on a recording, he kept it in. And I was like, why would you? I thought to myself, don't do that. Like we're having a disagreement. I don't really want that on.
That's the best.
Okay. So
I know everybody loves the bickering.
So we have found out.
It's authentic, by the way.
It is. And so we have found out that people really enjoyed that. So the travels started turning into less about the place, even though we definitely will tell everyone about a city we're in and whether or not we feel like we want to buy a house there. But it has turned into more about us as people and less just, I guess we've heard somebody once said to us, I can Google where you're going. I'm listening because of you two. And that has stuck with us. And they said that early on. And every time we feel like we're getting too Wikipedia, I always say to him, people are tuning in because they want to hear our version of this town. Stats are great, but they can look that up on Google.
Yeah, it is funny because we try and we always thought in the genesis of it, we always thought it would be sort of a hometown breakdown, and the can we live here is sort of ingrained in every single episode.
Sure.
But and I also thought I'd be doing a lot more tech talk, truthfully, about remote working and all that. But the truth of the matter is, once I spelled out on Instagram what I was carrying in my bag, nobody cared about that stuff anymore. So there's a moderate level of interest once in a while for people who missed that stuff way back when, but I'll just I'll DM people that info. It's not worth building a show out of it. So it was surprising to us early on, the response, and people were just like, you two are great together. And so
I kept saying, what does that even mean? I didn't even know what that.
Well, because husband and wives are not meant to do this together. I'm telling you, they're just
you and Amy seem
you and Amy were great. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we've done it before. We had a podcast 20 years ago, and we did a Harry Potter.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was the book or the movie that came out, and we detailed it when it came out. It was something fun.
Right.
But I don't know about you guys, but most of the couples that we know, there's no way they could do something like this.
Yeah.
Personality wise, working together, much less having two personalities to where you're both interesting. Because there's not, no couple that we know watches my show.
Right.
Oh, funny. Same here.
It's interesting.
But every couple, I'm like, there might be one of the two that's interesting. The other one's just a bump on the log. And I'm like, you guys, there's just something about the chemistry that you guys have that just works well together. And where I fell in love with the content that you guys had. And it's interesting you guys brought that up. I don't know. Do you guys remember the Jason Aldean one? You guys were in a car?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was dropping it. I was like a fly on the window, traveling with you.
Yeah.
And it was a great conversation between two adults that not necessarily like you think the same way or whatever, but you guys had you had a really good back and forth, and it was interesting. That's what attached me to you guys.
Well, thank you for saying that. I think what does make it interesting is, even if you were in our house any given moment of the day, how I would approach laundry is so categorically different than how Denise would approach laundry. And so, she's a planner and, thinks ahead and all that. And I am sort of to the nth degree. Is this a problem in this moment? No, it's not. So then I'm just, barreling through life. I've listened to your podcast. You are more reasoned and measured than I am by far. So I am probably more frontal lobe, I would say.
Explain that a little bit more.
Well, the best way to categorize me, I think, is a bull in a china shop, or, in the case of the podcast, or going out to Los Angeles to try and build a career in television and all that. The fact of the matter is, I've never been accused of having more brains than balls. And so that's just the person who I am. I'm like, what do you mean? We can't do it. We're going to do it right now, and that's, and we don't need any tools, or we don't need any planning. We're just going to go do it, And so to probably a character flaw degree of ability, sometimes I think that's where I fall into that's where I fall in.
But it probably works well for us in that sense, because if we were both planners, or we both were fly by the seat of our pants, it would never work.
Right.
So, and we have a lot of humor. So I think what makes this work is that he and I, honestly, in a day-to-day existence, whether we're recording or not, there is a lot of humor in how we live our lives. We don't take anything really too seriously. The only thing that will, and I said this on the podcast when we did our episode, the only thing that really brings me to tears are my kids. And they will break me down very quickly. And we're just very good about, I don't know. I want to say, I said this before and he started laughing. Like, we kind of give each other space, but he says I never give him space.
No. Yeah, that's kind of laughable. But I just wanted to interject. The kids make her cry, and a handful of other things. The only thing I really cry over are sports movies. So
yeah,
kind of. So that tells you our whole dynamic right there, I think.
Well, we had a little cry moment ourselves yesterday, my wife and I.
Aww.
And she's going through some issues with her cancer and chemo. And she's in a position now this week to where we're essentially watching her hair fall out. So she was kind of having a weak moment. I'm not trying to bring the moment down here, because this is supposed to be a fun podcast. And so, I went up to her and I was like, are you okay? You need a hug or whatever. We're kind of hugging. And I said, what makes me feel better when I get into an emotional situation like this that makes me kind of sad is like I pull out one of my Taylor Swift albums. And I don't think she appreciated that humor
in that moment.
And then she was like, you know what? She's like, I get so sick of walking into the house and you're listening to one of her albums. She's like, why?
Are you a
like,
Swiftie? I did not know this.
I'm a new Swiftie. I did a podcast episode with a friend of mine.
Missed that one.
Yeah.
Last year.
Okay.
And just like all the drama, the stories, the connecting the dots, the ABCs. And I'm like, this is fascinating.
Yeah.
There is a lot going on in her life.
The whole re-recording of her albums to get control of that. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of cool. Cause I was just a passive listener.
Right.
You know, it's just not it just wasn't my thing.
Naturally. She is very proactive in her fame.
Oh, you get your money's worth following her,
100%.
You know, and doing all that stuff. But
I was just going to interject. There are guys out there right now that are dying to just be the reason for one of her songs one day. You know, like there are so many guys that are like, I wish Taylor knew me well enough to write a song about me.
To put them on the map.
Yeah, exactly.
What I was going to say is the different things that you guys put out there with your podcast, and then we're going to get into the nuts and bolts and the genesis of how you guys started all this, because that's what I'm interested in, at least for this one podcast we're together.
Sure.
But like all the things that you guys do where I say, like, I feel like I have a comment, like I do. It's like you guys raise something. It's like you guys have an A story. It's kind of like a sitcom or something where you have an A storyline, B storyline, and a C storyline. So the A storyline, whether or not it's the town to town thing, and then it's the B storyline of you're driving to the next location and Denise is talking to her sister or friends, and then James is like, I need something in the back seat, and Denise is too busy doing. And I'm like,
happens.
So you have A, B, and C storylines, and when you guys put that out there in clips, I eat that stuff up, and I'm like, I feel like a stalker. And I have to hold back because I was like,
for sure.
We need
we're in the market for more stalkers. Yeah. But that's very cool of you to say. Thank you so much. And
but that's,
I mean, I want to say is especially, your recent episode where, I feel like you touched on something important, which is sort of where our show has also evolved at times. And that is, it's not always roses. It's not always road trips. We had a daughter who had a devastating first year in college, and now we have a 97-year-old mother who has dementia. And so your story with Amy is inspiring in a lot of ways. And I agree with you. Like, as I was listening to your episode, I felt like, as you explained, like, I'm not just putting this out here because it's good content and this isn't just for clicks. Like, this could legit help somebody. Yeah. And we've had those thought processes like, do we talk about this? Do we not talk about it? Like, how real can we be in this moment? And, so finding that balance has been important to us. And I think you're striking that specifically. And we obviously wish Amy the best on her journey. It sounds to us like the best possible scenario if you're going to have a cancer diagnosis. So God bless her. And obviously wish you guys continued luck will follow along, Yeah.
Yeah. It's you're kind of going through the weeds. You guys are, I am, as far as, okay, what do we determine that is content that we put out there and share? In terms of like the cancer stuff, boy, I went back and forth on it just myself.
Yeah.
And do I think this will be a good idea? Because she's not, she doesn't want to, she not necessarily wants to share stuff like this. Obviously that's something very, very personal.
Sure.
But I felt like we were approaching a point in her cancer journey to where she doesn't have any control. Cancer's dictating what we do.
Right.
And for us to turn it around to where now she can find a little strength in just telling her story. And if there's one person that's out there that's going through it that we've have since come to find out, unfortunately, there's a lot of people that are kind of doing it on their own.
Yeah.
Like they don't have people going to chemo with them.
That's really tough.
Or like with Denise and her mom, some people don't have family to help with them.
That's true.
Yeah.
So you guys sharing your story Denise, and I know, James, your parents had passed earlier.
Yeah.
And then all the difficulties of that, and you trying to, with your dad going through the house, trying to find all the paperwork and everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is somebody out there. It may not be millions of people.
Right.
And it may not be this week, next month, next year, but at some point we'll stumble across your thing because they're going through it.
Yeah.
And to know that you were kind of there for them. You helped them through, and you were able to take control of a situation to where you kind of feel lost and discombobulated, but now you have somebody, you're like, oh, I'm not by myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, I think it also helps in terms of like, I feel like people hear those stories and they find you when they have the bandwidth to find you. I'll use my grandmother as an example. When I was 22 years old, she sat me down and wanted to tell me about her own breast cancer situation. And she had a double mastectomy, and she just wanted to unload on somebody, and not unload on somebody, but let me restate that. She just wanted somebody to talk to about it. And I was the oldest out of the grandkids. Mm-hmm. And at 22 years old, quite frankly, was probably too selfish and too in my own personal life that I really didn't have the bandwidth to sort of digest all of that. So, anytime I hear a story like Amy's, I'm reminded of that moment, and how if I'm ever around a young man who happens to have a mom or something that's going through this, I have to remind him, like, I think I would be in a situation where it'd be important to remind them, like, this is in some ways when some women view this as losing their womanhood. Or, and when it's my grandmother's was an extreme degree, obviously, but, I think sort of sending it out there to the universe, there's an importance to that, I guess is what I'm saying. And especially with the dementia thing now, and a lot of people like you, or so many people are in our age bracket, or, we have a lot of millennials that listen to our show, and, they're going to be facing this. Yeah, they're going to be facing this, so, right. So specifically those issues are, it's important. It's not always comfortable, but I give Amy a lot of props for, opening up.
It's interesting that you mentioned how you had to sit with whether or not you wanted to record with Amy. Somebody suggested back in June that I do an episode about what was going on in our personal life with my mom. And I said immediately, no. I said, I'm not going to share that. That's for me only. And then 2 weeks ago, I called her. She picked up the phone and said hello. And I just sweat. I didn't even say hi. I said, why would you listen to an episode about a woman who has dementia? And she said, because my mom is getting older and my sister and I are fighting over what to do with her. She said, so I want to know what you and your brothers are going to do with your mom. And I said, you would listen? And she said, I would. And I said, it has nothing to do with travel. She's like, that's okay. She said, not everything is rainbows and unicorns. And so that video that I posted of my mom, I actually recorded that in June. And for me to hit the send button on that, the only reason I did it 2 or 3 weeks ago was because it related back to that podcast that he and I talked about over and over again, if I even wanted to do it. Yeah. It was really hard for me to hit that send button. I have to tell you, I had the video and I sat with it for an hour before I sent it. And then I got the most beautiful messages from strangers sending me messages that made me cry in my DMs, beautiful messages they posted on my reel, but in my DMs about their grandmothers and their moms. And I was really glad I shared it after that, but it took a while.
You mentioning that video again, I motioned to do, gives me chills, because that brought an emotional response to me. Like, my voice is cracking up right now thinking about it, because I was like, when she recognized you,
it was so,
I lost it. I was like, oh my God. And
I know
what is happening to me.
It was it was hard. And, I had been with her for almost 48 hours. And the night before, I was up till midnight searching how to get a dementia person to engage. How do you do this? And I read a couple of articles. It was like, oh, if she was into this, read her book. I'm like, my mom was never a reader. And then just one of the articles said, just do whatever the person liked to do to get them to engage with you.
Right.
And I thought she loved getting her hair and makeup done. Okay, I'm pulling out my makeup that I brought in a little Ziploc baggie because I was just, traveling for a short visit. And I was only recording it for my daughters. I never anticipated in 1,000 years I would catch her on camera and she recognized me. I could not believe it. It was a moment.
It was very touching. Yeah.
And somebody that you have no idea exists comes across that video and you give them the idea of how they could possibly use something like that in their situation.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. You were one of the first comments and you wrote a beautiful message and so appreciate it. At that point, I had just posted on Instagram and then, I had decided, okay, I will put it on YouTube. I'm going to put it everywhere then, because if it was so impactful on Instagram, maybe it'll be impactful on the other platforms. But again, I wanted to be very careful about how I presented it. But it was only after we did the podcast about my mom suffering from dementia and how it was affecting our lives, our travel, our daughters, that sort of thing.
And isn't it crazy that we could get dozens of beautiful comments from strangers thanking us or just sharing in the experience, but you get one negative comment about it and that outweighs everything on just the wrong day, the wrong time that you see it.
Well, now we're on to the Ukrainian flag. So it is funny. Certain things are just triggers for people. It's like, on one hand, we have this beautiful, I could not even bring myself to share Denise's video because it was just so intimate for her that I didn't recycle it on my own social media. But then, something as simple as a flower post and you roll up and, Denise found a little, I don't know, what is it, self-serve farmer's market in Connecticut. And the only thing people could focus on was that this family who had this sort of honor system fruit stand were supporting the Ukrainians with a little flag on their porch, and all the Russian trolls and all the insurrectionists and extremists came out.
You can see the mean comments on a flower post. It was literally an honor system. Someone had a little town in Connecticut. They had a table set up in their front yard with a basket. You put money in it. It had a little whiteboard of how much the flowers cost, how much the cherry tomatoes cost, how much the squash cost, how much the eggs cost. You obviously knew that they did it. It was their backyard. They had chickens running around. It was so adorable. And I just did a video about legitimately rolling up on it. I had my camera rolling as I was driving up to it. I didn't even notice, Brian, that they had one of those tiny little bike flags, the kind you put on a handlebar. That was a Ukrainian flag. I didn't even notice it. They had it attached to their tree. Oh my gosh, the hate. And then people, a lot of white supremacists too. A lot of people saying things about African Americans. I'm like, where did this come from? Like at one point, somebody said something like, oh, I bet that's not in a Black neighborhood. And I wrote back, I go, it actually is. And then they said, oh, really? Tell me where. I mean, they went after us. And I was like, for a flower post? This is insane.
It's like grown men need to find a hobby or something to do if that's how they're passing their time.
The big question is, so why the hell are you guys doing this? Why are we putting ourselves out there?
I know.
We ask ourselves
that's a good question.
I mean, really good question. So shitty out there sometimes, especially in the comments section.
Yeah.
You guys have done really well, and the kids are healthy, moved on, living their lives. You guys are able to kind of go around, and we're going to talk more specifically about that. Why put yourself out there to death by 1,000 needles?
It wasn't actually our idea. So when we decided a few years ago when we lived in Los Angeles that we were always individually looking up cute small towns all over the country. Like he would call me and say, hey, I just came across this yahoo.com article about Yahoo News about this great town in New York. Or I would say to him, oh my gosh, there's this little hidden treasure in Texas or where we've been doing this for years.
Yeah.
So we decided that when the last one was off to college, we were just going to sell everything. We were talking about it. Our friends didn't believe us, but we said, we're going to sell everything. And we're just going to find all these little towns that we've read about for the past 5 years. And we did it. But it wasn't until a month before we were about to load up our rented minivan, because we sold our cars. I mean, we legitimately sold everything. The only thing we stored was was the kids' artwork and our personal papers. That was it. Like, and our clothes. Obviously, we took some clothes, but we downsized that as well. So a month before we left, somebody that a friend of ours, really at that point, they're friends now, but at that point they were the parents of our daughter's friend. And he's a comedian by the name of Bert Kreischer.
Yeah.
And his wife is Leanne, and they both have successful podcasts. And we were at their house for a graduation brunch.
Yeah.
Because our daughters were both graduating senior year. And he approached James and said, I heard about what you guys are doing. You're selling everything. You're just going to travel the country and look for a new hometown. You should podcast about it. And what was your answer to him when he said that?
Oh, well, he took me into the studio and he was showing me around, and I didn't realize he was sort of pitching me on the idea of you should do a podcast until, that was his clincher. And I looked at him and I said, well, isn't it like super saturated now? And it's all celeb based. Like, I weed through more podcasts than I actually listen to now. And he said, no, he said, that's not true. And he said, especially if you can find something unique that you're going to be doing where you're going to be the expert on it, and you guys will definitely be the experts a year from now, So it was inspiration. We mulled it over for a little while.
Yeah, for like a month.
Yeah.
We did. And then what ended up happening is he came to me and he said, hey, have you thought about what Bert said? And I was truly thinking about it. What I was thinking about was somebody as successful as him thought about an idea for us.
Yeah.
And he had put the space in his brain. We were there somewhere. And I thought, okay, this guy pretty much, he's a hard worker. He comes up with creative ideas. If he's saying we should do it, we should try. This wasn't like the guy next door. This is somebody who has like 5 Netflix specials, who sells out arenas. And so I was like, all right, let's try it. So when he came to me, he said, what do you think? I said, where do you want to do it? So we did our very, very first episode in our dining room in our home in Los Angeles.
Yeah, before we left.
Yeah, it was 30 minutes. We didn't know what to talk about. So we just talked about the idea of what we wanted to do. And we were going to be leaving in about a month. And I sent that episode to Bert's personal assistant. I mean, I didn't really even know his wife. I had to get her number from our daughter. Right. And I said, I don't know if Bert mentioned this to you, but he suggested we do a podcast about our travels. How do I get in touch with him? And she said, send it to his assistant. So I did. And then 2 days later, Leanne called me and said, can you do a FaceTime? And they loved it. And she said, we get submissions all the time, like all the time. She said, in the minute that Bert hit play, he looked at me and said, wow, this is really good. What do you want to do with it? And she did say we were really apprehensive about listening to it because
if it sucked, they didn't want it to affect the friendship between their daughter and ours.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So then she came back with a few suggestions. She did suggest we make it a little longer. She had some technical suggestions on mics and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then she said, re-record it. I don't even know if she said re-record. I don't know, but we recorded it and made it an hour long. And then to our surprise, about a week later, she asked us to be on her podcast.
Yeah.
And that is kind of what launched everything for us. So the actual day we left, got in the car, got in the minivan, she launched the podcast with us on it. And then we launched our little 1 hour in our dining room to support that interview. And that really helped. So that is actually how the podcast itself got started. We never anticipated recording our adventures ever.
No.
And then we thought we met some listeners early on, people that found us through Leanne and Bert, and they were really supportive. He actually said to us, if you can make it beyond 21 episodes, that's a success. And then when you look at the numbers, it's unbelievable. I think there's something like 1 million podcasts out there, but only 80,000 or 100,000 that are over episode 21. Because
I think they say 98%
Yeah.
stop before the 21st episode.
Because it's so hard and no one gets it. There's not a single person that understands how hard it is. Nobody, unless you're doing it, unless you're 100% doing it, you don't realize the time it takes just to record and forget being the engineer, the sound engineer, the lighting expert, the content creator, the editor, the poet in the descriptions. I mean, the hashtag expert, the geotag. You haven't even recorded yet.
I would also say the biggest hump that I think a lot of creators have to get over, and obviously the most successful ones do. We're talking Dr. Dre. We're talking, people who are megastars. Taylor Swift. You have to be willing to continue doing it, even when the numbers aren't supporting you doing it.
Right?
And
100%.
and you have to be able to. You have to be able to separate the marketing or the social media aspect of it and just focus on trying to make the best damn show you can make, And as two people who were never in front of, well, Denise was actually in front of camera, as you mentioned on her social media. Like Denise had a presence on Instagram.
Just with my beauty business.
I had 20 years in the television business, but I was never in front of camera. I think maybe one time. And so, the grind of, not really the grind, I mean that in the hustle kind of way, not in the arduous kind of way, but the hustle kind of way of like coming back to it every week and trying to look at it with fresh eyes. And how can I tweak this? Or, I found myself in the podcast doing things like saying things like suffice it to say, and all these like weird little nervous tics because I was nervous as I was trying to present the material that we were trying to present. And so coming back every single week and trying to weed that stuff out and becoming the best host / show builder that you can, that you can be.
And we just didn't know, Brian, like truthfully, like when we were on the road, we didn't know. We just thought, okay, this town is cool. This is why we like it. Yeah. And we'll just throw it out there and see if anybody agrees. And that here we are now 65 episodes in. So I guess people do agree.
Yeah. Can you imagine if Bert and his team went to James and they were like, hey, I think you're onto something. This is really good, but you got to drop Denise because she's not, or the other way around or something. But that's the selling point. Again, it's the fact that you both personality wise can do this, not only individually, but the hard part is doing it together. It's a little dance when you're doing it. When you're a solo host or whatever, you take command and you're in charge of the pacing and essentially who's talking or whatever. But when you've got a co-host, and I used to have a live show with another co-host, it's a dance between two different people and their personalities and everything. And if one person's good and the other one isn't, it doesn't work out. So I think that's a great thing for you two, that they both, or that Bert and his team came back to you and kind of invested in you guys.
Oh, he really did, Brian. I mean, so much so that he made a special effort to be on an episode with us. Like he got off a flight. It was last December and he came right to the studio to join us because it was 6 months later. And
we were doing a session with Leanne. We were doing a recap, an update episode, and boom, in busts Bert.
And we were
fresh off a plane from Alaska. And
sure,
I mean, that's pretty flattering because we still, if you know Bert's podcast, you know that we have a long way to go to get that kind of response from the marketplace. But it felt really good. It felt like, okay, we should continue doing this. Like we're on the track. Nobody wants to, like, we're not being shunned out of the community or out of the village yet.
Yeah. I mean, look.
Well, that's the thing to remind everybody that's kind of in a position that you guys are, that I am, is it's nice to see some of those podcasts that, the comedians have or whatever.
Yeah.
But we can't compare too closely because this is the team and this is the budget, which is zero.
Oh,
they have a team and they have a budget.
Yeah. And plus, a lot of people did not see Bert when, he was doing a show in Bakersfield and staying at a Holiday Inn, a $50 a night Holiday Inn with roaches climbing all over him in between sets, So there was a time where, I think he and Leanne were always kind of a team, but,
yeah,
that's the example of having a good woman behind you for sure. I think any young guy could learn from Bert's example there, but,
he does talk about, and we've met with his producer, Halston, who produces his podcast.
Yeah.
And Halston has shared, Bert was doing his podcast by himself for, I think it was 4 years before Halston came on board. And Halston said it was a very part-time situation. And Halston approached him and he was doing it all himself. He'd go to comedy clubs and then come back and record at night. So when you hear something like that, 4 years, we're talking, he wasn't Bert Kreischer. He was just Bert Kreischer. You know what? He was just somebody trying to make a name for himself. So, but then, Brian, there are overnight successes. They're rare, but then you hear about them and you're like, oh, how did it happen? See that you just got to stay the course.
That's a great point. Stay the course. But I'm curious to get both of your guys' take on this.
Yeah.
As podcast creators, how do you do the battle in what you guys want to do that you think is fun, that content wise?
Yeah.
And what the potential audience wants to hear or what is successful?
Good question.
Well, so I take requests. But the requests haven't always been successful. Which is odd because you would think that if a listener is saying, we want to hear more of this, then other people are thinking that. But I have to tell you, they haven't always been successful. So it's still for us what we like. It really is. And if it hits, it hits, because we haven't found requests to be big, like viral, anything. It's just, so we'll talk about a topic, we'll discuss it, or a city we want to visit, and just hope that in our adventures, we find fun things and other people will find it to be fun. That's honestly still how we are doing it.
Yeah, I would say we've had great success working with a friend who is a producer in television, and she really sort of tapped into the best parts of us and was able to sort of soft script us. There have been episodes, for a few episodes. There have been episodes where we've also sort of blocked out topically, like, oh, I read this thing in Google, and and that's when it starts to become a formatted talk show for us. That's when we find we not only enjoy it less, but it's just not as good a show. So
it still goes back to our, like, what we like as people. And we just hope it resonates with somebody else. And sometimes it doesn't.
No. Yeah, for sure.
Sometimes people don't want to hear about that little small town in Texas. They want to hear about Houston. But that's not really our show. We are really about finding the hidden gems for us, because that's what we want to do. We want to move to a new hometown and find something that hasn't been touched yet. We still go to the big cities. Like one of our favorites is Savannah, Georgia. And we thought that episode would go like huge.
Yeah.
No, it like streamed at 143 views or something on YouTube. I was like, Savannah's so popular. Like, what happened to that episode? It's so weird.
But I'm talking to myself too when I say this, because I have to keep believing in it. It's not so much that episode sucked or nobody cared about it. It's just the people are out there. They just haven't found that episode. There's going to be people that want to hear that.
That's very nice of you to say.
That's a very good point, because we recently had a cruise ship episode that just went bonkers on YouTube after being up for 4 months, 5-6 months, something like that.
Yeah.
So, all of a sudden somebody latches onto cruise ships and bang, the algorithm starts popping off. And you're like, okay, well, I guess everybody who likes cruises found us finally, which is great.
But it still goes back to he and I discussing the topics ahead of time. And sometimes there'll be a topic where he's like, I don't want to do that. Or he'll say to me, do you want to do this? And I'm like, no, that was really boring. Like, how are we going to extrapolate fun out of that? And then there are other times where we both will compromise. Where he will say, I really want to do this. And then, you know what? It sometimes ends up being really fun.
Yeah. But I would say for the more, so, going back to the formatted talk show format, the one thing that we have found that works is rather than doing 5 topics and making an episode out of that, we do one topic like Jason Aldean, which is the episode you found. And now we sort of have this sub channel on our YouTube channel called Nothing Got Solved, where categorically I'm on one side of the spectrum on a topic and she's on the other. And I think those have worked really well and have allowed us to sort of be somewhat topical at times when we feel like it, but not be chained to some sort of format that, we're not Maury Povich, we're not Oprah. We're not, so to be sort of try and aspire or chain ourselves to that format, we're doing ourselves a disservice. We're never, how are we gonna break through? We're never gonna be Ricky Lake,
Well, I love that idea because it's kind of like, if you look at it, it's a small segment of the overall show that you guys kind of produce. And I still go back to what I said at the beginning of this podcast, is that no matter what you guys determine you're going to talk about, the two of you are the content for me.
Thank you.
You guys can talk about, you guys just mentioned here, something boring or something that James wants, Denise doesn't, or vice versa.
Yeah.
I think it'd just be like, I would tune in because let's say it's a topic that neither one of you care for. Right. I would be like, I'm kind of curious how that's going to go with the two of you, because you guys are the content.
We have heard that before, and I think sometimes we tend to forget it. Especially, we feel like we have a service to provide when we're in a city to listeners, to let them know how great or what we think of it. And then I think that sometimes we have to remind ourselves that people are tuning in for us. I had a friend one time say the same thing you did. I'll listen to whatever you guys are talking about. And I was in shock when she said that. So it was a huge compliment, and thank you. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves that people like to just hear what we have to say. We're not.
It's shocking to me that they do.
It's really shocking, but very much a compliment. I mean, really nice.
It's watching the two of you engage is kind of like you're putting together this sauce on the stove, and it's the two of you kind of mixing in different things and different perspectives. I keep going back to the car ride with the Jason Aldean thing, and we're in a time now that it's very hard to hear conversations with people and actually lifting up the topic that's the box, and looking at it from different angles.
Yeah.
And the fascinating thing with that you guys may not have even noticed this, but I did, which is why I was attached to your show from then on, is the fact that you guys had an adult conversation that wasn't just mirroring each other. And I think there was one point that James, you were driving.
Yeah.
You said something and Denise didn't quite, she was like, and kind of pushed back on it. And you kind of just paused. I don't know whether or not because you're the husband or this is just your personality or what, but you took it in with what she was saying. So I could see you kind of processing. It may not be what you were thinking, right, or how you thought or what your opinion was of it. But to watch two people pick up the box, turn it around and talk about it, you don't see that a lot these days.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So there's why you have another gem for the show that you guys are sitting on, in a sense that you're kind of seeing two different personalities react to just various things, like sitting down and, okay, we're gonna play Taylor Swift's latest album. Let's go song by song and see what James thinks.
Right. Now that would be an episode.
That is awesome. Okay, I think that's what we're gonna do.
But it's what I'm saying. So you sit down, and I don't know if your daughters are Taylor Swift fans or not, but
absolutely they are.
Brian.
So
they are Swifties.
Yeah.
So they sit down with James. I mean, not like I'm producing your show, but this is what I find that's interesting, is that I would be curious to see what James really thought of track number 1. And he's sitting down with his daughters or whoever is available to do it with him, who's like a huge fan.
Yeah.
All right. And then, Dad, what do you think about this song? What do you think it's about? And you're like, she's upset because he broke up with her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, Dad, it's
Well,
she left the scarf at the house in the kitchen. And
I think it'd be funny if like we're into track number 5 and you look and James is crying.
right, exactly.
There, I can tell you probably, on one hand, I count the Taylor Swift songs. I'm not saying I'm not a huge fan. I find her to be a boss lady. Like I really am in awe of what we just talked about this on one of our recent episodes that's going to be coming out. But I find it amazing that this little blonde-haired girl that I remember from the Grammys has built an empire with an acoustic guitar. So, all due respect to her, but I will say, if it's not Bad Blood with Kendrick Lamar, then I'm probably not going to be as inclined to be into that tune, because that's a banger. So, and that's the Taylor Swift standard that I measure every other Taylor Swift song to.
We're going to get him years. Just give it time. He'll be
but that for me, and then to see something that maybe Denise has no interest in.
Oh, let's put on football.
And then maybe, watching comments that Denise makes through a football game or something.
Oh, they're hysterical. I say this stuff to him all the time. He's like, "Are we watching the same thing? Do you know what you're watching right now?"
Yeah, we do.
I know. He's a football person, played football in college, and he married a woman who has no interest, unless it's the Chicago Bears. Then I'm fine.
Inexplicably,
like 86 Bears.
Yeah, she hasn't watched. Don't let her fool you. She hasn't watched the Bears in 4 decades.
It's true.
So
but anyway, so we can do Taylor Swift albums for him and get commentary, and then we could do a football game for me.
Yeah,
but
it'd be fun.
But that's the thing, to where I'm like, I'm interested. Again, I'm not going to say this to. I don't think I've said this to just because people are on the podcast with me or friends. I mean, I don't say things that I'm like not totally behind, but you guys have something that's just, I'm interested in it. And I like, and this is the great thing about social media and clips, because there's going to be times where I can't consume a podcast.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
But the 20 minutes that I'm on my phone when I'm at my son's hockey game,
right,
or I'm, killing time standing in line somewhere or whatever, and I see the, 50-second clip of you guys in the car, or I think there was one that popped up. I think, James, do you go to Egypt or Cairo or something?
Yeah, I went to Cairo. Yeah.
And I'm like, what the hell is going on this show?
I know. She was like suffering in the new house with my oldest daughter. We helped our oldest daughter get a house in Corpus Christi, and it was just a slow summer for me with work and everything. And she said, "You're driving me nuts." Like, she actually pushed me onto the plane. So
you went with a friend.
I went with a buddy. Yeah. Who my buddy had another friend who dipped out at the last minute and was like, I'm doing this trip. Are you coming or not? So, but I think I want to believe anyway that one of the reasons that our chemistry on camera works is because we've been through every phase a couple could go through, from early lust to partying like rock stars, to raising children, to readjusting our lives now that our kids were nightmare teenagers or nightmare middle schoolers, more appropriately said. We've had years where we've been madly in love. We've had years where we've been at war with each other. Right. So when all the dust settled a few years back, I think we were finally like both reaching a point in our lives where it was like, okay, now it's time. Like, we always knew we weren't going to retire in Los Angeles. So now it was, like, not just can we live here, but can we do this with this person? And when all the dust settled, it has been a great thing, because it's like, all right, you're fine. Get in the car.
Do you still
right?
Do you still like me?
or the same. I mean, there were days where literally, I think if she were strong enough, she would smother me with a pillow, And so, but I think those up and downs and the ability to still love each other, obviously, but also have a sort of dark comedy laugh at some of those moments is really for us what seems to make the show. Like that's
there's two different senses of humor between the two of you, and that's what's great too.
Yeah.
I can't specifically describe it, but you both have something kind of different with your humor that just works. That I'm just like, I recognize, and I'm like, I feel connected to you guys and following along with this, whatever journey that you guys are on.
Well, thank you.
Yes, appreciate that.
So I've got two more questions.
Yeah.
I've got 1,000 questions, but this particular episode was more of the kind of behind the scenes and getting to know how you guys got started or whatever. One just popped in my head as you guys were talking. I want to ask that, and then I'm going to end the show on the final one. Have you guys recorded a show where you guys were pissed off at each other? And which episode is that, so we can go back and listen?
Ooh, good
for
question.
cues.
What episode would have been that episode? There was one
that you were just so sick of, like you're fighting about something.
Yeah, it was a Corpus Christi episode where we were shooting in Corpus Christi, and I think it may have been Corpus Christi. And we were supposed to shoot a second episode, and we didn't because it was not a good day. It was
the first episode ended with her standing up and saying, "Do whatever you want," and walking out of the room.
Yeah, because he was being so difficult that day, and there was no getting through to him. And so I was like, I'm out of here. And then the other episode was shortly after we recorded it was while recording our Mexico City episode, I believe, because we actually had a very rough time in Mexico City. I was just, a lot of things just boiled up. And that was when James said, I'm going back. We just landed in Mexico
City. I was going to
City.
leave Mexico City.
Yeah. He's like, I'm going back. I'm getting on a flight and I'm leaving. I said, okay, let me help you. And so then I was like, get the suitcase. And so then he's like, well, it's already packed. I'm like,
she had quit the show and everything.
Yeah. I was like,
there's no, like it was almost Skiptown All-Star that day.
Yeah.
Singular.
And then he kept saying, well, it's stars with an S. I'm like, you can just take the S off. It's easy. You don't have to change much on the logo.
I love it.
I'm not doing it. And I'm like, we gotta drop an episode next week, girl. And she's like, I'm not doing it. Get out. I've had it.
And it wasn't even get out. He had said, I'm leaving. I was like,
it's true. Okay. I did.
And it was, I think, 2 a.m. And it was comical. And then the next morning, I think it was queen beds, and you slept in one bed.
It took a couple days to get over that one.
It took a couple days. Yeah. It was not a 24-hour thing.
Thank goodness Mexico City was so new to both of us that in that one, it actually, everything we said and every sort of travel tip and detail that you could probably maybe find on Google, but for that particular trip, at least, we were so enamored with the city that it got us through that episode and out of our little rough patch.
Yeah. And I think also we had a tour guide. We for that city, we actually had a tour guide. And so the next day we still were not talking to each other, but it was great because a tour guide was like in the middle. So if I wanted to ask James a question, I would just ask the tour guide and then he would answer, and then whatever. So
we had a translator is what she's trying to say.
Yeah. So we weren't, so in that episode, actually, I believe when we recorded it, you brought up, there's an episode where he brought up that things were not going well. And then I think it was the Mexico City episode, or it might have been this episode after that where he was bringing it up. And I said, okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room. But we've never recorded an episode where we're mad at each other. We've recorded episodes where we're annoyed with each other for sure. For sure. Yeah. Sitting down and annoyed with the other person because they did something the night before, and we still have to play nice on air.
This is what you have to deal with when you sleep with your co-host, right? And just like,
I know. That's what they say.
That's the D storyline that kind of goes along with the entire season. Like, I feel like I need to start a segment on the Tossing Salad podcast and find somebody that just follows you guys. And it's like, what's going on with the Skiptown All-Stars this week?
Oh my God.
James pissed Denise off and stormed off the set.
Our kids threaten all the time to like do Skiptown Exposed.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
You guys had one of your daughters on or something, right?
Oh,
we've had them all on.
Yeah, we've had them
all on. Okay.
recently we had two, the middle one and the younger one on. I think it was like 4 episodes ago. And we had them on just talking about how their summer was going. And, that's another thing. We never anticipated having our daughters on. I mean, we did the 3rd episode because we're taking our daughter to college. So we thought, let's do a little interview with her in the hotel and talk about her going off to school. Having our kids on regularly, because we do have them on like maybe every 15th episode or something like that. That was a suggestion by a listener. They're like, we like to hear like the family stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, really? And they said, yeah, we love when the girls are on. We're like, okay, so we do it once in a while, but not a lot.
Especially our youngest one. I mean, she was the one that the other two had the advantage of leaving home and coming home once. And then we sold the house. My oldest was already living in her own, a whole new city by the time we sold the house. So she could care less, but couldn't care less. But, our youngest one it was the one that had the for sale sign up in the front yard during her graduation party. So there's a lot of bitterness and off-camera vitriol over that still.
Right.
And it's legit and we recognize it, and we're not, but we're not saying her emotions aren't valid, because they are, and neither she nor I had anything to we never had an experience like that when we were growing up at that age. So we try and understand, but at the same time, and she understands, like, financially, this is the best move for our family. This ensures that I can get my bachelor's degree and graduate debt free and blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, there's an emotional cost to all of that,
Sure.
So we've dipped into that with our daughters on certain episodes.
Yeah, we have, but he and I have not ever had, let me rephrase that. He and I have never been angry at each other on camera. We just would never.
Oh no, we bicker, but that's, it's every 20 minutes for us. So,
we're not going to record if we're not in a good place.
No,
because that's just going to affect everything anyway.
And and I never want to come off as being the husband and like, oh, he dismisses her, or he this, or he.
But you don't do that anyway.
I know, but it would be easy, I think, in this format for people to apply whatever their own relationship is going through to me, or like it would be easy for them. It would be easy for guys listening to be like, oh, his wife is really breaking his balls, just like my wife breaks my balls, and and you're not really, like, Denise gives me a lot of leverage to do whatever I want to do in life in general, even on a daily basis. I exceed that sometimes and she gets pissed off, but for the most part, it works because who we are on camera is sort of a boiled down version of who we really are at home.
Yeah.
Sure. James doesn't want to be a 10-second meme for a certain movement here and there. It just plays over and over again. It just clipped out in the right segment.
Yep.
And then like Taylor Swift fans are holding that meme up everywhere. And they're like,
I know. My views are up, but my comments are down.
So I want to end this episode with one of the big questions that I was wanting to ask coming into this. And that's going back to when you guys were deciding, are we going to do a podcast? I mean, you guys are kind of going back and forth. You're getting egged on by, various different people. Did you guys talk to anybody else, friend-wise or family? Because you guys talked about this a little bit in an episode, to where, is it worth it when you're kind of a creative type between the two of you to go to family and friends and say, hey, we're thinking about doing a podcast. What do you think?
No, I've never, ever shared any of my dreams with anyone. And that's the truth. And when I opened up my spa, I didn't tell anyone I was opening it until after I signed the lease. And I'll never forget, I was at a party, a friend's birthday party. And at the end of the night, I said, hey guys, just wanted to let you know, I'm opening up a day spa, like right down the street. And these are like 7 of my closest friends. And they said, what? And it was during the pandemic. And they said, how could you not tell us? And then somebody said, this is so her. So I never, ever share my dreams. Never. The only one I ever did with my parents, because they were so supportive. But
why?
I shared them with,
why don't you?
Because friends always have shit to say, Brian. Your closest friends will tell you it's a bad idea all the time because they would never take the risk ever. Even right now, we're 63 episodes in and people are still like, oh, you still doing that little podcast?
Yeah. I mean, we have tons of friends who don't even know that we're still doing it, frankly. We've had people recently.
It's not a secret.
We've had people
right now. We're not keeping it a secret.
No, we're not keeping it a secret anymore, but they just don't know we've continued.
Because they're not interested.
Because they don't listen to us. And so we've had people recently recommend an episode topic to us that we did 3 weeks ago. So, I said, like, okay, thanks for the tip.
Yeah. And I sent them the link. I'm like, yeah, we did that 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. Right. So
what about you?
I learned I'm the opposite. Especially being a creative and trying to work in television, Hollywood, and all that other stuff. The early inclination is to tell people what you're doing, or I'm writing a screenplay, or I want to write a movie about this, or I want to XYZ, all these things. And the more you do that, the less likely I have found you are to actually complete that task. And I think sometimes it's good to speak things into existence. I would just caution anyone on who they're speaking them into existence with, unless it's a coach or somebody, a mentor of some sort, somebody who's going to help you get across that finish line. Everybody else is there. There are haters for sure. There are people who love you, who secretly don't want you to succeed, which is a whole other episode. And then I think there are people who are just not creative or risk takers in their own rights. And so anything outside of, why would you do that? You're getting a 401k here, Right. Like that is, and I feel like that's a societal thing that's just sort of drummed into us as young Americans when we're just getting out of college or just getting out of high school or whatever. And we are taught to be good soldiers and fall in line and fill out your TPS reports and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
And so, but for all those reasons, if you really want to do it, I would say, just do it. And this is, I didn't do it early on, but fortunately I got to a point in my life where I aged enough that I just don't care anymore what people think, you know what I mean? And I feel like even so I used to pitch reality shows to some of the producers I worked for and with and all that stuff. And I feel even then in those pitch meetings at times, I would be sort of, the undercurrent of that meeting would be like I was asking for permission for them to see me as a show creator rather than as an editor or producer or some rank and file crew member. I'm not asking that permission anymore. And the one great thing that Skiptown All-Stars and YouTube and the Liberated Syndication and Spotify and all these venues for podcasting has done is it allows me the ability to say, you know what, we're going to do a show about this and I don't care who listens and let's just go for it. So Skiptown is more in the vein of my truest self, my truest personality, because I never wanted to ask permission before, but always felt like I had to,
Sure.
It's great being in the spot we're in right now. I don't feel like I have to do that anymore. So
my biggest advice to anybody who's a creative like you is if you have an idea, share it with a like-minded person. So truthfully, whenever I had anything, whether it was my beauty business or the podcast, there's a particular person that comes into my head who's a mover and a shaker and a business owner. That is my friend that I will call and say to her, what do you think? Because she's moving forward. I would never call my friend who works a 9-to-5, who is never going to leave their job, and ask them what their opinion about my endeavor that is going to go off the reservation, because what we're doing is really off the reservation. I feel like a lot of people,
especially for people in our age bracket.
Yeah.
And so I would only share, if I any advice, share it with people that are like-minded. I didn't share this. We shared this with nobody. The day it aired with Leanne and Bert, or Leanne, was the day all of our friends knew about it, and they were mad. Like a lot of them texted us and said, "Oh, so you did this," and didn't even bother sharing it with us. because I knew they were not going to have anything positive to say. So they would say, why are you doing this? Like, for what reason? Like, they're just, so.
I mean, when you break it down, it's like, oh, we're packing up the house, like we're packing up the lives of 5 people. We're not sure where we're going. And, oh, by the way, we're starting a podcast at this, at the tender age of 51 or 2 or whatever it was. And it does sound ridiculous, right? On paper, but then at the same time, to us, it like the ability. I already had the gear. I already worked in television, so I had cameras and microphones laying around. And all that. In so many respects, it was like, oh my gosh, this makes total sense. Like we could totally do this, So I would just say, like, I guess to sum up my emotions on it, you bring up a good point. We had the Kreischers, so we found an expert. An expert found us. However you want to look at that, our particular story. I would say find an expert. Do not look for a focus group, because if you look for a focus group, you're going to get the crappiest sitcom on TV. You know what I mean?
And they'll pick you apart, and they will, in my opinion, also depending on who you're talking to, will take you bringing it up to them as, okay, well, here's 20 things you need to do. And then all of a sudden you're focused in on all these small little details.
Oh, Brian.
And then you don't get going.
You know the people we know.
Yeah. Totally.
That's the thing, though. I'm probably a little even more pessimistic than you guys are on something like that, because I feel like, again, it's pretty safe for me to say anything, because there's nobody that is around me that watches this or follows this. Not even Amy, my wife, hasn't watched any of this. I view a lot of those people, and I'm not being, dramatic about it. They're typically just more wet blankety.
Yeah.
With anything.
That's good. It's good. Because I really didn't want to run, like, I don't want to classify people as haters. Like, I don't feel like everyone's a hater and they just don't want me to succeed or anything. But I do feel like that's the perfect term. There are a lot of people who are a wet blanket, for sure.
And they don't maybe understand, or not in the same place that you are, or don't have, we go back to this creative mindset. You'd go to a non-creative person, you're going to get pummeled to where you're like, you self-doubt. And there's enough self-doubt, and what's the other terminology where you feel like you're faking it?
Is it fake it till you make it?
Well,
we're self-deprecating. I don't know.
Well, it's a point to where you start to self-doubt.
Yeah, imposter
syndrome when you're a creative person, because
for sure
you fantasize about different things that you can do. Well, what if I do this and try this and whatever? But then there's a lot of times to where you're like, I'm awful on camera. I'm boring. I hate my voice. I don't have the setup.
I know.
Too many filler words. Nobody cares what I think. And
it's like you imagine Game of Thrones, and what you have is a shitty drawing of Pete's dragon. You know what I mean? And you're like, what the hell? This is not what. But if it's in your blood, I think you're doing it. Like we're all doing it, right? You got in front of the camera, you hit record, you're amazing. Yeah. And I think there is a Venn diagram for specifically what you're trying to do on your own. And that is, you have to be equal parts hustler and equal part creative. So there's, that overlap right there. Like the one advantage that Denise and I have that you don't have if you're doing it by yourself is that, on any given day, one of us can fill up more of that Venn diagram and sort of pull the slack. If she's with her mom or whatever, then I'll watch the episode. I'll do the QC and I'll upload it myself. And normally she's like, normally the buck stops with her. But on certain days, it's like, well, she didn't have time to watch this episode, so we're dropping it, and here we go. Yeah. So you don't working. I mean, you have a lot more leverage to talk about what you want to talk about, but at the same time, I
do want to ask you a quick question, Brian.
Yeah,
because you started TikTok really early on, you were OG. So when you were doing it, what were your neighbors and friends saying when you were doing the gardening posts and the gardening videos? Were they like, why are you doing this?
So my social media didn't get traction until I decided to get away from like my personal accounts to where, you're putting stuff out there for friends and family and people that you work with, people you're forced to having to make these connections with, which you're like, I have nothing in common with any of these people.
Right.
And at the time in 2014, I started to find myself getting more attracted to doing garden stuff, which I'm like, oh my God, if the Brian from 20 years ago saw this, he'd be like, what the hell is,
but it's
what's
so
going on?
Good. It's so good though.
And it's therapeutic. I love the learning. I love the growing. And it's just something different. So I started in 2014. I'm like, okay, instead of on my personal account, every time that I post a tomato and my coworkers or my family or friends that I had are like, we've seen this freaking tomato 3 times. Who gives a shit about
it's a different tomato, dude?
Just because they're not into it. And I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna start a garden account in 2014. So I started the Garden Voyeur, and that was on like Instagram, and then moved into TikTok. And then it just, over time, you develop into a community to where you're like, I had no idea there were these other freaks out there.
Yeah.
And literally anything that you can think of in the world that you're interested in, no matter how freaky it is or how just minute, you're like, there can't be another person.
Right.
There's thousands of people.
Yeah, it's true.
And so I got into that, and I've been doing that. I still do that on my personal account, which is just a garden account on TikTok and Instagram. And that's been going on for almost 10 years, but I'm like, I'm so done and bored with that now. Well, like I have a 10-year expiration. I'm like, I'm going all in on this podcast stuff.
Well, you should. But when you first started on TikTok, were people making comments like, you're too old for that, or why are you doing that? Or did you not tell your friends and neighbors and close circle of people that you were doing a new TikTok with gardening?
Well, with gardening, you're dealing with an older set anyways. That's typically a kind of a hobby for older people. So it wasn't, there wasn't any of that. Although I will say I did find that, people around me in real life, the ones that we can touch, that we see, were discovering me and secretly following.
Oh, that's awesome.
And talking about things. And then I would hear it secondhand, or somebody would say something like, oh, interesting. That was, that I said that on my account, which they don't necessarily follow, but that they're coming and watching or whatever. So that's kind of where that kind of happened. But I'm kind of just done with the gardening thing. And I'm like, I find myself super excited with and I say the podcasting is more of just the vehicle for a show. Like I keep saying it's the Tossing Salad podcast, but it should be the Tossing Salad show that's delivered on a podcast, that's delivered through social media, that's delivered this way and that way.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily just a solo show. I'm still in the making. This is a test kitchen for me.
Yeah.
To either develop this into some other show with another host or to do something else. But my thing is, and this ties into what we talked about earlier, which is great. This is at the end of the show. It's a test kitchen for me to sharpen my tools and, interviewing people and having a co-host, which I had for a live show, and then doing things on Taylor Swift or doing things in the garden. I'm not able to really package it up right now to clearly define what I'm doing, which is kind of an issue, but I'm not too concerned with it because I am doing 99% of the things and topics that just interest me.
Yeah.
But it's practice for something that I don't know necessarily I'm going to be at maybe in 6 months to a year, but at least I'll know when that does pop up, I know how to do StreamYard, and I know how to do my camera stuff and the lighting and the technical things because I've practiced it, and you can't hurt me with comments or 0 views because I've been through it all.
Yeah.
On just the stupidest things,
You're Teflon now.
Well, you're doing great. So you keep doing it because you're doing great. And we just learned something new from you, this StreamYard.
Yeah, we did not know about StreamYard. And I actually watch your podcasts on Spotify. I don't even have my own up yet to watch on Spotify. So,
ask you questions.
Yeah, exactly. So
that's how I bringing back the whole Bert thing.
Yeah.
You know how all those comedians, they seem to be on each other's podcasts and they have their own thing. They're all secure in their own, what they're doing.
It's a circuit for sure.
It's true. Yes, they are very.
But they kind of cross promote and they do things together. And then you see, and I'm learning about some of these younger comedians that you mentioned Bert, and he does something with that Tom guy, right?
Tom Segura, yeah.
Tom's really.
And then
Two Bears, One Cave.
Two Bears, One Cave, and then there's all these kind of younger. I say younger, they're 10 years younger than I am, and I'm fascinated by how comedy is what they have in common, but they kind of do things together. And I kind of, that's my whole thing of trying to reach out to kind of shows that are kind of starting up a podcast or they have it going on, and you find a group of people that are going through the same thing.
Yeah.
And I can say, James, how do you get the setup with the camera each and every time you guys are moving around? What's your setup like? Sharing information like that, but then also it's content for us too.
Right.
And finding other shows that are kind of have the same sense of humor and kind of have the same goal in mind that, hey, we're all kind of just headed in this direction.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's kind of do it together. And it's been fun because you guys are, I consider like everything I was thinking about, you guys are that show and those people.
Wow.
And there's other shows that we kind of have talked and we kind of cross promoted. I'm like, but we're just not the same vibe.
Right.
But that's kind of where I'm thinking, having like almost this little network of different shows, and we have these recurring meetups or podcasts or lives. Like I think doing a live with you guys would be fun. We have people, asking us questions and we're just kind of messing around and we can test out some different things. So that's kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, I'm great with that. I love the idea that you're putting together of getting other podcasters involved and maybe doing a meetup of some sort. That sounds great, but we're up for a live, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're big fans of yours as well.
We love the fact, and the best, we have obviously spent the last year doing our own test kitchen for what works for Skiptown All-Stars.
Yeah.
But I could tell you, just being here today is so much fun for us. It's like to be, victims in your test kitchen has been a real thrill. So, she's going to record a little. Right
do you guys? Okay, I know I said 2 questions, and this was like a long time ago. My last thing. Do you guys like being guests, or would you rather host and have guests? What's easier or harder for you?
Ooh, I think we just like chopping it up, truthfully. So whether we are hosting or whether we are visitors, I think it's because we are used to putting together our own episodes, and we obviously talk to each other. But I think whenever there's a third person in the mix, it has disappointed us at times where we've done similar Zooms or whatever, and they just didn't get as much traction as one of our normal episodes, because for us, they've been really enjoyable to do them,
Right.
And so I don't know, maybe I'm not speaking for you, but for me, it's like, I'll take either. I'm happy to do it. Anything that gets me out from behind a desk. And I've been grateful to be an editor all these years, but there are days where it's like, oh man, here we go. Time to make the donuts, and doing this kind of stuff is a thrill for me. I love whether we're hosting or visiting.
I love being a guest because I don't have to do any work.
Yeah.
She doesn't have to edit. She doesn't have to do any of that.
I'm so happy. I'm going to do some work with the content that I'm, putting together while you're talking. I did a little recording, and but I actually prefer being a guest. It is hard though, because I do like to ask questions. So just, so I did throw in a couple for you, but
is there any stress being a guest in you're wanting to be a good guest? You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't want to be the boring guest.
No, there's more stress in recording. I feel this is personally, there's more stress in recording and putting a show together and hitting all the points. Whereas a guest, you kind of have no idea what they're going to ask you. So it's kind of like a surprise party, sort of.
Yeah. It's sort of
That's just for me. I'm just talking about
I mean,
me.
we feel, clearly we feel, if we're looking at the timestamp on how long we've been talking right now, clearly we feel comfortable talking to you as if you were sitting here at the table with us,
This went as well as I imagined, because I thought this would be an easy interview, just because when you deal with another podcast and two hosts, I don't have to worry about carrying the load. Not necessarily carrying the load, but you know what I'm saying? Like if somebody's not good on camera or one word answers, that's hard.
Those are the worst.
Those are the worst. But look, we've been talking for a while. I know I gave a few really long-winded answers.
You did.
I'm not pressure. Feel free to edit me down. I'm not going to be sensitive.
Oh yeah,
so,
he's going to.
Yeah, don't get disappointed, because you don't expect the same numbers that you guys get when you guys see my stuff come out, and then it's like we only had 8 people watching.
Stop it. I think we have
like
9.
you said, a couple months from now, people are going to find it. And they're going to be like, "Oh, looky here."
But the feeling that I have here at the end, I had a lot of fun. It's exactly what I thought, because I feel like I kind of know you guys through your clips and stuff. And the key thing for me in most of this, whenever I'm dealing with somebody else, whether it's a co-host or a guest, it comes down to kind of sense of humor, and being kind of self-deprecating a little bit. And knowing when to be serious, knowing when to kind of, be a little edgier and try to be funny or whatever. Sometimes that doesn't work out for me. But I loved it. I appreciate you guys.
I disagree too.
Spending your hour and 25 minutes on Thursday, on a random Thursday morning. And you guys have to promise me that we get to do this again, because there's going to be other things. I have so many questions. I really do.
Of course.
For sure. And you were gracious enough to be the host this time.
You just did it for sure.
I know. I hate saying for sure.
In real life.
I don't. I only say it when there's a red light on and there's a mic in front of my face.
Oh, right.
Well, again, it's going back to, but I actually meant for sure this time. But, but I was just going to say, you've hosted us this time. Next time's on us.
Yeah.
We'll be setting up the gear. You get to be the guest on Skiptown, and we're just going to pump the shit out of it. So, and I love being on your show, because we made actually, this is not to extend this podcast, but we made a conscious decision on our show as we evolved that we're not going to curse on our show. And I've listened to your show, and I felt like there were a couple of things. I felt like I could be a little more my true self on your show than I can be even on my own. So we go out with a, what's that little ticker at the bottom when we post it, to where it's like, okay, this goes out for kids or it's grown up stuff or whatever. And I'm like, I don't curse just to curse. Right. But I'm like, hey, we usually kind of have some fun, and I don't want to worry about whatever. So guests are able to kind of do what they want. And we like to keep it to just the S word. So
we'll have to talk about all of that.
The F word, so as much as possible.
Are you guys, how are you going to tease being on? Like, you guys are going to reveal something on the latest Tossing Salad podcast, and people are like, ooh, are they swingers? Or what is going on? What are they revealing on the Tossing Salad podcast?
The Tossing Salad podcast.
Your daughters are like, what's mom and dad doing?
It obviously begs the old Chris Rock joke, right?
What's that?
The old Chris Rock joke about how he the documentary of the guy in prison tossing salads.
Yes.
When I first stumbled upon you on social media, I was like, wait, what is this thing called?
I know. Our minds were strictly in the gutter. I thought the same thing. Like, what is his content?
So you did a good job there. But once we figure out, the gardening thing and all that, it's like, okay, now it all tracks.
Well, and your content, tell me if I'm wrong, but also your content every week is different. So it is truly a salad. It is. There's always something different in it.
My grandma, when she would have the family come over, and it's party atmosphere, you toss a big salad. Yeah. Right. And so I tried to bring something from the gardening roots that I had into a name. And I had a few people that got a little upset with it. Why? From the gardening community, when I told them I was doing the podcast, it's funny because we just discussed this 20 minutes ago. Yeah. And when they're like, well, what's the name of your podcast? And I was tossing, do you know what that means? And I get that all the time. And so sometimes depending on how I feel, I'm like, what do you mean what it means?
Oh yeah, you want them to say it. You want them to say it.
I'm like, have you never had a tossed salad?
Oh,
you know?
That's great.
And they're like, you need to Google it or something.
Yeah.
I can't believe, do you realize, I don't know. I don't think that's a good idea. Like, do you know me? And my intent with everything is to have fun, be kind of funny, and have a little bit of a
tongue
and so
for sure.
The reason why I finally said we're going to do Tossing Salad Podcast for the name is because it weeds out people that probably don't like my humor anyways. So I get it. I know the positives and the negatives with going with that, but I'm like, yeah, I'll do it.
Toss it up.
Anyways, Skiptown James, Skiptown Denise.
Toss it up.
Thank you very much. Again, I went with who was verified first.
Toss
I don't know. You guys let me know. Do I go with the person with the bigger following? I'll get that
mark because she has way more followers than I have.
Tossing Salad
And then
Podcast with your host, Brian.